Number two in these talks about the work of Donald Westlake, this time focusing on his novel Cops and Robbers, which came out in 1974 under his own name. Under his own name, Westlake was mostly a sort of comedy crime writer. He's probably the most distinguished comedy crime novelist in U.S. history. Capers, heists, things that are meant to amuse by putting people in unlikely situations. We'll talk about these even more in the next one when we talk about his main series under his own name about a bunch of burglars led by John Dortmunder. But also under his own name, he wrote standalone novels that one you sort of get the sense he was attempting to sell to the movies. By the time that he was a successful novelist under his own name in like the late 60s and 70s, it was pretty clear that movie rights were going to be an important part of an author's income. And since Westlake is the great writer of money as the motive, you can see this in his own work. Since he was a writer his whole life, he never did anything else. He actually started as a paid writer when he was still a teenager in high school, and he once said in an interview, they were asked him, how did you stick with writing so long? And he said, well, I never had any kind of backup plan, so I just had to figure it out. He's like, the writers I knew who left the trade, they all had other things they could do for a living, but I never did, so I just had to figure it out. So one of the ways you figure things out, of course, is you write stuff that might sell to the movies, and he had a couple successful movie sales. I mentioned in the first one selling his book The Hunter to Hollywood. It was filmed as Point Blank. He had a sale to of a kind of heist comedy movie that was eventually made into a movie called The Hot Rock. It's not bad. It had Robert Redford. It's not one of his better known movies, but I think it's pretty fun. The screenplay was by William Goldman, who went on to do All the President's Men and The Princess Bride and these other wonderful movies. So it holds together pretty well. Anyway, another one that you can sort of guess might have been sold with the intention of adapting to the movies is this book, Cops and Robbers. And Cops and Robbers really impressed me when I read it. I think it's one of Westlake's most excellently conceived and completed books. It's about two officers in the New York Police Department who live near each other on Long Island, and every day they drive together into the city to do their shifts. One of them is a patrolman, a senior patrolman. The other is a detective. And because they live near each other, they've coordinated this with the department so that they can carpool together and save money. And there's a bunch of interesting things about this book. One is the structure. Unlike doing just sort of a straight third-person read or an all first-person, Westlake mixes two first-person perspectives, one for each of the police officers who are the main characters, and third-person, where he's describing events. So it'll be like first-person from one police officer's point of view of events, then third-person, then first-person from the other police officer's point of view. So he's combining three perspectives, the neutral third person and then the two first-person. This is not common, and it's certainly not commonly done well. You always get the feeling that the book might have benefited if it just been told neutrally in third person or all in first. But Westlake really uses this well to develop the characters of the police officers, just what they're like as human beings, because when it's written from their point of view, you can see how they differ from each other, and when it's compared to the neutral presentation of events that they're involved in the third person sections, you can see how what you know about them and how they tick from the first person sections affects what they do in the third person. This is pretty neat, especially for a work of commercial fiction where no one's making him try this hard. He could just write it all in the third person and he would have sold and it would have been fine. He was successful by then, and it's a good idea for a story. It would have been fine. So for him to try this out, it is kind of pretty cool. Each of the officers is a pretty distinct person, but you get the sense of why they would wind up where they are. The basic premise is they are feeling worn down. They're feeling just fed up with it, worn out. Their life is getting really difficult. Like they have these jobs and they get paid okay, but there's inflation, high cost of living. They're trying to make a go of it in New York, right around the time that the city was starting to get really expensive to live in. They're doing this commute to Long Island every day, which is the traffic and the gridlock that they run into is a major symbol of the book. And most of what they do in the book is some stuff that they thought of doing while they were in gridlock, and it's sort of implied really, really well that the gridlock is responsible for the choices that they make in the book, because without the gridlock they would not have had their minds move in this direction. And where their minds move, the conceit of the book is they realize individually and then together that being police officers is a great way to get away with crime. The uniform really anonymizes them, allows them to get away with behavior that other normal people just wouldn't, and they want out. They want out of this situation. They don't want to face a whole life working till retirement in New York City. They're tired of the job, the crime, which was a major concern in the U.S. from about 1965 to 1975. Like the crime. They're worn out by the crime. They're worn out by living in Long Island and doing this commute. They're in that kind of middle-aged blah where they feel like they can see the future. They can look around at the old guys around in the department. They can imagine being them. They don't hate the job, but they don't take any pleasure in doing it well, and they don't seem to have the kind of ties that would hold them away from crime. So one of them tries it out and gets away with it just fine, and tells the other one, and this becomes like the bond that they wind up trusting each other with, is that they are willing to do crimes while wearing the uniform. So obviously the title Cops and Robbers takes on that delicious second meaning that every good kind of novel should have, or good kind of crime novel, where it's not cops and robbers like two separate groups of people. They're cops and robbers. I get it. Okay, cool. And the tone of that era, of that mid 70s, fatigue with America, fatigue with what following the rules and what the middle class life that you've achieved has offered, is like really there, and wanting out, just wanting to quit. It's all over fiction from that time. It's similar to Death Wish, which was a huge cultural phenomenon at this time. It's similar to Chinatown. It's similar to a lot of stuff that was happening in the culture. This is something like Westlake's version of it, but given a kind of caper-based, crime-focused story. And he thought of a really cool crime for them to pull off. I won't give it in detail in case people want to read this book, which I hope you do. I think it still stands out as a work of crime fiction. The other thing that makes it stand out is the characters of the police officers is so they're different shifting frames of reference, and their differences in terms of how they think and how they act is really well brought out by the contrasting first person sections. So one of them, the patrolman, is more impulsive and more easily led by simply his desires, and more prone to imagining. And the other, the detective, is more logical and more able to see things from other people's point of view, and more able to plan things out, as one would hope from someone who made detective. Because they have these two different points of view, they are able, trusting each other, to combine their strengths and to put together these these schemes using the one skill for imagination and impulsivity when it's appropriate, that saves them at times, and the other's ability to sort of be rational, to see things from a different point of view, and to plan things out. Um, so it's, if you can imagine it sounds like a reasonably stereotypical kind of relationship, but when you're seeing them both in their first person point of view sections, it's really effective. Westlake really writes both of these sides very well, and he's able to show how they would view the exact same events differently and take different lessons from it. Uh, it's a really it's an effective trope, and it's a sign too of one thing that Westlake was willing to do, which is to experiment beyond the formulas of the genre, similar to Elmore Leonard, similar to Charles Wilford, or Sarah Paretsky. They were willing to take some formal risks with the structure that the commercial needs of their work didn't really require them to take. And that's something I think should be encouraged and people should look for. Just because something's a piece of commercial fiction, it doesn't mean that you can't, do some razzle dazzle with it and try things out and try to tell your stories in different and interesting ways. As long as the kind of the pleasures that the reader expects from that genre come through, I think it's great when people get there by a different road. The ending of Cops and Robbers is unusually effective for an ambiguous ending. It goes back again to the trope of the gridlock. Doesn't really spoil anything. The two police officers have agreed that if they're successful in this major crime where they really want to get enough money to leave their whole situation, just completely change their lives, that they will not do what they know criminals do and do stupid stuff. They won't tell anyone else. They won't spend any of the money right away. They will wait and wait. They will wait a long time, like 2 years, I believe, before they begin to lay the seeds of their escape from their lives in such a way that no one would connect it to this particular crime. And so they're in the gridlock. They're going into town, into the city from Long Island, and the gridlock, now that they know they have the means of escaping it, the gridlock just seems that much worse and that much more intolerable. And they sort of like are both thinking this at the same time, and one of them turns to the other and says, "How about a year?" Meaning, I don't think I can do 2 years of this knowing that I have this money that we could use to get out, because this is awful. It's one thing to feel trapped. It's another to let yourself stay trapped when you have the means to get out. It just makes it that much worse. The other one says, "Yeah, or maybe 6 months." So right there, they've kind of set the potential seeds for their, undoing by not being able to hold to the discipline they insisted they would have of keeping their promise to wait long enough to get away with their misdeed. So it's an effective way of letting the reader enjoy the thought that they'll get away, but it's also an effective way of letting the reader, if they're inclined, enjoy the idea that they are probably going to get caught, because they're going to do like other criminals and they're going to screw up, and it's going to be known that they have all this money too early, and someone's going to put the pieces together. I think that's great. That's exactly what you want from an ambiguous ending, because you want the readers. You cannot predict exactly the sympathies of your readers. If you're a good author, that's one of the main things a commercial fiction author has to do. They have to know reader sympathy. They have to know their audience reader sympathy. And just like splitting the book into these 3 parts, he splits our sympathies where, on one hand, we kind of admire the daring do and the willingness to try to change their lives, but on the other hand, we have to now remember now that, wait a minute, these are freaking police officers. We're not supposed to want these guys to get away with the crime. So he structures it in such a way that you're left being able to choose either route for where your sympathies ultimately lie. Would you like these guys to get caught? Well, maybe they will. Would you like them to get away? Well, maybe they will. Maybe they'll get away for a while and then come back at it. Maybe it's a good example of the kind of story where the ambiguous ending is completely appropriate and not just like an example of stopping the story early for no good reason, or just not feeling like committing to a particular ending. This one, it works just great. And for people interested in America as it was in like or as it saw itself through its culture in the early 1970s, I think this book is really telling, and it's really fun to read, because we can learn and have fun at the same time. Okay, that's it about Cops and Robbers. Next one, we'll talk about Donald Westlake's other main series than the Parker books, the Dortmunder series, a name that Westlake says he got from a brand of beer that he saw one day and knew that he had the name of a main character. Until then.